Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to give it a minute or so just to allow everyone to join us before we go ahead and get started. We'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Critical Path Institute's Rare Orphan and Pediatric Disease Programs webinar series. My name is Dominique Cruz, and I'm the Senior Project Manager for RDCA-DAP. RDCA-DAP provides a centralized and standardized infrastructure to support and speed up rare disease characterization with the goal of accelerating therapy development for rare diseases. Today, we are happy to welcome you to the webinar, RDCA-DAP and NORD's IAMRARE Platform-to-Platform Federation Lessons Learned. Before we have our presentation, I'll just go over a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please place them in the Q&A chat box. All participant lines are muted to reduce background noise, and this presentation will be is being recorded and will be made available on the CPAP YouTube channel shortly after we conclude. And then if any other questions come up that you didn't get to ask our two speakers, feel free to email us at rdcadap@cpath.org. And now I will introduce our presenter. So Dr. Kasey Baker joined NORD in 2021 as the Associate Director of Technology. In this role, she develops and implements strategies, tools, and standards around data collection, security, and analysis supporting NORD's research programs and collaborations. Presenting with Dr. Baker is William Roddy of CPAth. William Roddy currently leads CPAth's data engineering team and develops tooling to support the moving and processing of data from a diversity of data sources with a focus on extracting evidence to improve patient care. And we're so pleased to have you both with us today. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Baker.
Great. Let me share my screen. All right. I think we're all set.
It's okay.
So I'll kick us off here and just talk a little bit about the relationship between NORD, RDCA-DAP, and the Critical Path Institute. Within this context, NORD is the host for the IAMRARE platform. And the IAMRARE platform powers patient advocacy groups to support patient registries. So they help the patients with the data collection, structuring the research questions, storing the data, the outreach to the patients, and working directly with the patient advocacy groups. RDCA-DAP, on the other hand, is a platform for data discovery and analysis. One of the really unique things that we do is that we curate and standardize diversity of data sources to common data models. And we're really sort of the research-facing end of things. So we're supporting regulators, researchers, and patients who are interested in accessing that data for analysis. And so we really support two ends of the same spectrum, where NORD is really facing towards the patients, focusing on that data collection, acquisition. And then we're kind of the output end of that, where RDCA-DAP is powering being able to get that data into the hands of people who are doing the research and asking questions of it. Next slide. So this is kind of a diagram of that relationship between these two groups. And one of the things that RDCA-DAP identified early on was that a partnership with IAMRARE NORD would be really valuable because they have that direct connection to the patients. We have this direct connection to the researchers. And ultimately, the goal is that the patients and caregivers who are generating this data want to see that we have insights that get generated from that. And so we, early in our partnership, had a process where we would, NORD would manually create bespoke data exports for each of their patient registry groups. They'd transfer that to RDCA-DAP, and then CPATH would manually import and curate that bespoke data. And this was part of the kind of full pipeline of going from patient to insight, but there was a lot of manual work in the middle that made this a fairly time-intensive process. It was really sort of exhaustive, and it was bespoke with every one of them. There wasn't a whole lot of work that we could reuse between every time that we did it, which meant that it took a long time to go from patient to insight. But if we take a look at the next slide, one of the things that we started to do was looking at how we could standardize that data export and the data export structure and the process on the NORD end, and then on the CPATH end, how we could standardize and automate the data import and curation process. Really trying to make this the gold standard of what would a standard process look like. And so that was what we kind of set out on here, was to try to standardize these things. So we had a couple different goals. Take a look at the next slide. When we kind of said, well, what would standardization look like, and why would we do this? There are sort of three goals that we were focused on. The first was to decrease the time to discovery. We wanted to reduce the data transfer workload. We wanted to reduce the manual processes that were involved, and be able to get data discoverable in the RDCA-DAP as quickly as possible. So enriching that metadata, making the data catalogs and dictionaries discoverable and accessible to researchers to know what data is available to them. We wanted to make that happen as fast as we could. The second thing that we wanted to do is facilitate data standardization. So we recognize that there's always going to be some manual work done, especially when you're working in the rare disease space, where there's different interests and needs that are based on that rare disease area. But we wanted to align the ingestion pipeline and the export structure with our OMOP mapping pipeline to create the common data model as much as we could. So the idea was to create some reusable resources and decrease that time to core data element standardization, really kind of putting us on a launching pad for that data standardization, where goal one is helping us be aware of what data has been generated by patients and caregivers. And then goal two is giving us that sort of launch pad that we could get it into a standardized form. And then the third goal is to really create a feedback loop between CPATH, NORD, and the patient groups to improve the data quality, the collection, and the curation. So recognizing that there's kind of three different phases to this, and that going from collection to curation, going from patient to insight, we want to make sure that we have really strong data quality throughout each one of those steps, and that because there are so many transformations that are happening, we don't want there to be any errors that get introduced to the data. In addition to that, as we begin to identify areas for improvement, we want to get that feedback to the patient group as quickly as possible so that they continue to generate high quality data that can be used for research. And so it's one of the really unique aspects of this project is that we have this kind of feedback cycle between researcher, curator, and the patient advocacy group. I'm going to hand it over to Kasey to talk a little bit about what that process looks like on the NORD side.
So based on Will's goals, what have we done together to accomplish all of these very complex and high level goals? So on the NORD side, we kick this process off by going through this portion, which is first we pull the extracts of the survey data from our registry database. This raw data is first transformed and de-identified, meaning the protected health information and or the personally identifiable information are removed. We have made significant improvements in this step to remove all of this information, which has reduced the processing time. Those include making survey questions or marking survey questions as PHI, so we don't have to manually go into the sheet and remove them. They will no longer be included within the extracts. We have also additionally incorporated some natural language processing capabilities that help to remove potentially identifying information from the text fields. So we all know that the context provided in the patient's own words is very valuable and very important. However, the risk of having identifiers like names, dates, and locations within this text to be able to tell their own story is very high. So using this processor, it identifies and targets these elements and replaces them with asterisks. So it will keep all of the context intact so you can convey that important information and experience to anybody who's looking at this information without sacrificing, obviously, the identifying elements with it. So this scrub data extract then comes out in the form of an Excel file from this area. And from this Excel file, we generate JSON files. So the JSON files would include the responses from all of the participants, as well as our data dictionary, our metadata, what is being offered as a survey, what order, what questions, etc. All of this is very important to be taken together. So all of these we send to CPath very securely via an application programming interface or an API. Okay, so that was a lot of jargon. We totally understand that. So what does this actually look like, or what does this actually mean, kind of going through this process? So when I talk about the database, we pull the information that is input through the IAMRARE platform. So the surveys are presented in a very friendly manner through our user interface for participants to be able to complete the surveys. And then we process it into the different file formats, which I will go through in a little bit more detail. So with the IAMRARE platform, we do have a user interface that presents the surveys and makes it easy for them to be guided through the questions to answer the questions in the correct order, as well as have some input, information, tooltips, etc., to have them understand what you're asking within the question. A lot of the medical jargon is sometimes confusing, and sometimes people interchange certain terms. So to help the participant answer the question in the way that the researcher or you are looking for, we are able to add some information in there to kind of guide them through that process. So as I said, after they enter the information, it goes into our registry database, and all of that information is then pulled and compiled into that extract, that Excel file I had been talking about. So the Excel file really is one of the most common ways that people, humans, look at and review the information. It's easy. People usually have a program that can open all of these, and it's pretty easy to navigate. So the simplicity in navigation, though, however, is kind of limiting when you're structuring some of these very complex orders and hierarchies with some of these surveys that we offer. So within an Excel sheet, for example, you can add another sheet. But even within a sheet, all of your information and all of your metadata needs to be organized in a row or in a column. So it was a strategic decision to transition from sending Excel files to CPath to sending the JSON files. So from the Excel files, we generate these JSON files, which are a huge advantage. They are not a flat file structure. It does provide a hierarchy. A hierarchy means there's a child under a parent relationship. So you can kind of see some of the order the questions are being offered. You can see branching logic, and you can also read these as a human. You can look at the file and you can still see this is the survey. These are the different elements. This is the checkbox question. Nested within here are the choices. So if you needed to review any of these things or check anything, you still are able to do that. The files are flexible, they're lightweight, they're widely used as well for automations. And as I said, they're human readable. So that also makes it very widely usable automatically. So with this flexibility and these JSON files, it does also allow us to use automation for certain processes, some of which I will talk about moving forward.
So picking up on the CPath end of the process, we kind of look at that S3 bucket as the kind of trade-off point. So now we have the data in the S3 bucket, and that's where we begin to kick off the automations and the processes on CPath then. What's pretty cool is we're able to go from that S3 bucket to FAIR. This entire process is totally automated, but we do have points for human review that are included in there. So although we can run the pipeline from start to finish, one of the things that we really want to make sure is that we're not blindly passing over any kind of errors, or that we're not ignoring any kind of issue. So the first step in the process is a validation check. And that makes sure that the data that we get from NORD, both the metadata and the data, are compliant with the structures that we expected. And one of the reasons that we do that is that as NORD adds different data structures, or as they continue to evolve their platform, we want to make sure that we're keeping up to date and in sync with that. And so this internal compliance makes sure this compliance check makes sure that our pipeline will account for everything within those data. And if there is any kind of issue, we raise an error right away. And that gives us kind of the opportunity to go back to NORD and have an understanding of, well, is this an issue with our expectation? Is it an issue with how it was exported? Is there a bug all the way upstream with how it got collected from the patient? And the second thing that it does is it ensures that internal consistency. So when we take a look at the data that we got and the metadata, we want to make sure that both of those are consistent with one another. And because we have a lot of assumptions that are based on how the metadata relates to the data, we have a whole series of checks in place to make sure that those fit together with one another. And this really gives us the confidence that we're able to have automations around it, because otherwise we wouldn't want the curation process to sort of obscure any kind of issue within the data. There is value to that manual review, but we want to put as much of that inside of a computer doing the task and take the human out of the loop when possible. You know, let computers do work that computers are good at, and let humans do work that they're good at. So that's really the validation stage. Then we go into the transformation. This takes those JSON files that have that really rich hierarchy with them, and we do two things. The first is that data that can be flattened into tables where we have rows and columns, we load that into a database. That eventually becomes source data that will be available for you to request in FAIR. The second thing that we do is data that can't be flattened, we put into a knowledge graph. And maintaining that in a graph structure means that we don't lose any of that rich hierarchy that NORD has modeled in the JSON file, but we're able to query over it with knowledge graph tools. And we're able to connect that to ontologies and other resources within our knowledge graph so that we can really enrich it and understand the depth of the data. This gives us tools that make it easier to search for the data. And it is a sort of an annotation pipeline that helps us understand what data did we receive, and it helps researchers be able to find it. Once we've done this enrichment and transformation process, we publish that data to FAIR, and then that's where the researchers are able to access it. And the really cool thing is that all of those steps, although there's quite a bit that's happening, is all programmatic, and it's something that we can do with a click of a button. One of the big things, though, is that this has also enabled us to give feedback. So I'm going to pass it over to Kasey to talk a little bit about some of the examples that we have seen of being able to give that feedback to NORD and registry groups.
So even after, of course, improving this full process, we found additional opportunities even within the data itself to work together and find some really creative solutions. So one example is timing variables. So looking at natural history data, timelines are critical for learning more about disease progression. So examples captured in some of the surveys offered include date of diagnosis, or maybe it's the date of a measurement that's being recorded and tracked over time. So as mentioned previously, though, including actual dates of certain elements could be potentially identifying. So dates of surgeries, for example, if it's a unique surgery, if it's an emergency surgery, that could be potentially identifying. So we do want to capture this very valuable information and the timeline that it contributes to, but we also obviously want to keep the information anonymous. So as Will said, allowing, improving this process to reduce the time, as well as adding these other improvements, has been critical for improving this entire process from NORD to CPATH and posting. So previously, as I had talked about before, we had been sending Excel files, and within those Excel files, we had the real dates within there. So because we were sending these directly to CPATH, CPATH would anonymize them before posting. So they had the capacity to be the capacity, but not necessarily the biggest efficiency, because it does take them a lot of time as well too for the ingestion to be able to have this extra step, find these fields, and anonymize the data. So with the transition to the JSON file, this allowed for automation on our side as well. So now what we do is with our JSON file, or with our generation of the JSON file, we automate a random date shifting algorithm for any of the dates that are included within the survey information. So when we send these JSON files to CPath, this data is already pre-anonymized for them. It does not take them extra time. It also does not take us extra time because it's automated. Previously, if we had wanted to do this rather than having CPath write a program to do it, we would have had to go in manually to go in every column, every cell, every survey to change the dates with a random date. It just was not going to be possible. So what CPath had devised at that time was the shortest, most efficient way. But with this new transition, it's much more secure. It's much more, it's much faster. So this has been really great to ensure that, again, the process is more secure for shifting these timing variables and limiting the surface area for vulnerabilities with the transitions. So I will turn it over to Will, who has another really great example that we are still currently working on.
Yeah. Well, this is a great example. Like Kasey said, that we continue to iterate on this to really understand what's the best way to approach it. But one of the things that we identified is it's really critical to understand how old a patient is when these different life events happen to them. Understanding what benchmarks might apply, what normative ranges are, how you would expect for different values or lab results to vary are going to vary by age. And understanding how early in life are these rare disease characteristics presenting is important for any kind of disease progression model. One of the things that we realized through the curation and the standardization process is that we weren't receiving a year of birth or an age for all of the patients in these registries. And without being able to derive that, we're not able to do a lot of analyses that are really critical for drug development. So we went back to NORD and said, what can we do? And NORD identified that they do have the patient's date of birth, but they weren't sending it because it was PHI. And so one of the things that we're trying to balance is the desire to keep the data anonymized and secure, but also being able to provide the right data elements to actually do the analyses that matter. So what we are working with NORD to do right now is trying to devise a way to either receive the year of birth, potentially doing some anonymization around that year of birth so that it isn't as granular as the actual date of birth that we get from the patient, but that it is the right level of granularity that we can still power those analyses. And in the case that it might still be concerning, that there would be a risk for re-identification, we're looking at other mechanisms to anchor those age timelines. So as we continue to get updates from NORD over time, we're still able to say, this is how old that patient was, or these are the right normative ranges to apply when we're considering year analyses.
So as discussed with all this process improvement, so we have gained a large amount of experience and we have been processing all this data together for years and for many, many registries. So there are currently 11 different registries with data on the DAP, and we have a couple of new ones coming soon, including SCN2A. So as you can see with all of these, it's a wide range of diseases, which also translates to a wide range of surveys and question types that come along with that. So this is why standardizing the processing between our teams was challenging, but also critical to ensure timely maintenance of these data sets and any data sets that will come within the future. So I will pass it over to Will to show you kind of some of the real-time examples of the benefits of this.
Yeah, so this is a screenshot of the FAIR Data Services platform and what the IAMRARE data sets look like in the platform. So we're able to store everything in what we call a collection of data sets. This is going to show you the latest and greatest, the most up-to-date versions, what we have received from NORD, all in one place. And so you get a good sense of these are the IAMRARE data sets that have been added to the platform via this pipeline. And there's a hyperlink to this at the bottom of the slide there. We can share that too. So you can log into the platform and see all the data sets that have gone through this processing pipeline. And to kind of double click on one of these, we go to the next slide, I'll give you guys an example of what the data catalog entry looks like. So at the top level, this kind of describes a little bit about the data set, what diseases are relevant, some keywords, the publisher. And one of the curation activities that we have is building out this data catalog. But because of the automations and the pipeline around this, we didn't want there to be that manual data management task in the middle of having to actually build this information. We wanted that to be included in the pipeline. So one of the neat things is if we jump to the next slide, NORD is able to provide us with all of these boxes that are in blue. And that's great because it's coming from the patient group. It's included within the metadata. We're getting this information when we receive the data itself, which helps us know that it is being annotated by the patient groups themselves, the researchers who are closest to it. So we have pretty good confidence that this is correct. And we're able to import this from those JSON files that they're building. On the next slide, we have a series of gold boxes, and these are all built by the pipeline itself or additional pipelines that run when we're doing the knowledge graph enrichment. So some of these are components that we define, on pipeline run, the created date. That's something that we get when we run the pipeline itself. But other things like study types, collections, et cetera, are annotations that get run as part of the pipelines. And if we jump to the next slide, this is kind of an example of where we're at with the different registry groups. So there are a variety of different standardization and curation levels of those. A lot of them are non-standardized until we have a use case that's relevant for them. But as we get kind of input from researchers on what's valuable, we'll start to standardize the right variables of interest. And just to kind of highlight some of the successes here, about 60% of the registries have been requested through the platform, which is pretty exciting. So the other thing is that a lot of these registries haven't been on the platform for very long, so we expect that those numbers will increase over time. But to see that, right away we start to get data requests that are related to these is useful, and that it varies. It's some internally to CPATH, our own quantitative medicine team, and others are coming from NORD or from other patient groups. If we jump to the next slide, I can highlight a couple of the successes that we've had so far. So the first one is really this flexible data structure. Kasey was talking about the differences between the flat CSV structure versus having it in JSON. And that's really one of the key pieces that enables us to do this kind of work and do it so quickly. Because we're able to manage things through a common pipeline, that we have an expected core structure, but that structure is really flexible on the internal. There's a lot of ability to do automations while not restricting the types of data or the amount of data that we can get. The second thing is the completeness and quality. So previously, there was a lot of errors in the metadata because of human error. So the process on NORD's end being human-driven meant that we occasionally would have cases where the metadata didn't match the actual data, or that the data would, not align exactly how we expected it to. And those issues really get reduced because of the common data structure. And it means that we're improving the overall quality, and that those errors can be identified programmatically now. So rather than having to have a human in the loop going cell by cell, row by row to see, does this data make sense? We're able to do that through our ingestion pipeline. And again, that's something that really gets powered by the fact that we have this flexible common structure.
So to build on those successes today, I have stressed this in numerous opportunities, but the decreased processing time really has made a big difference. So previously, as I said, it honestly took us 2 to 3 months to make that Excel file, to review it, to scrub it, to double check it, recheck it, and everything. 2 to 3 months per registry per upload. So even if there is an update the next year to include more information, to include more surveys, 2 to 3 months again to be able to process and look at that file. Now we are down to just a few hours to pull, to process, to check, and then to transmit the extracts over to CPATH. Again, significant reduction in this manual review, significant reduction in errors as well when you're looking at all of this information. And as Will had said, their pipeline as well, seconds to run, it's automated, and then any of the post checks and reviews that they have only takes them a couple of hours. So this has been a huge game changer in being able to update these data sets as well as process new ones as they come on board. So, and as we also have stressed, the feedback loop. So being able to work so closely with CPAC to work through this process, the changes in the process, and any issues that we come across. So the quality process, the quality control process has really driven the improvements that we have kind of touched upon in the various aspects of the source data and extract processing. Also adopting the feedback on their standards, data collection, as well as their pipeline feedback and their own ingestion of the data will help us to maximize the potential for the data sets and their utility for drug development use cases should they arise. So even from the start, a lot of this feedback, a lot of what we have learned goes all the way back to the start. So we did talk about the platform very briefly, but honestly, that's where it all begins for us, our program and our surveys and everything. So NORD has over 10 years of experience in building and launching registries in partnership with patient advocacy groups. Our program has continuously evolved, but it was actually the launch of our upgraded platform in 2023 that presented a great opportunity for us to revamp our onboarding program. So that program provides education and support to groups for strengthening the core principles of data collection, analysis, and data stewardship. It is so important to start these conversations right from the start, so that eventually when the data is processed, collected, etc., it's readily uploaded, shared, and used should the opportunity or collaboration immediately arise. So just to kind of go over the main aspects and examples, all of these are highlighted and covered very thoroughly by our phenomenal research team. A lot of the registries listed that contribute information, they have been through this program, so I'm sure they can attest to all of the wonderful things that they have learned, all of the different aspects that you know of or that you may not have thought of that contribute to the data and what the data looks like and how it's presented. So just in general, I've broken them down into 5 different buckets that all very closely and very to a large degree affect the data that eventually we will be looking at or maybe even processing. One big bucket is content. So think of this as your patient-facing content. What does the user interface look like? Is it easy to navigate? Is it easy to understand what you need to fill out? What question to answer? How to answer the question? This would also include some of the templates and communications, emails for re-engaging people to come answer surveys and complete the next round of surveys, emails to recruit people to be able to participate, all of the benefits, et cetera, for participating. Another big one is the legal and regulatory, obviously, the compliance of having the data, maintaining the data, keeping the data secure. So having best practices and procedures for the studies to be able to look at the data, analyze the data, protocols for your study, obviously your IRBs and all of those recommendations and requirements. The consent forms, these are some of the most important things. Your participants are gracing us with this data. They're taking their time out to give this information. So they need to be informed with what that means and what that implies and the repercussions for any of this in being able to receive this data and to send this data, as well as legislation. So anything that needs to be abided by state, by country, etc. All of this obviously very important for maintaining your data and ensuring that you are in compliance if you are going to share, or maybe you shouldn't be sharing it. So coordination is another big one. So I will say a lot of these small patient advocacy groups that we work with are sometimes just moms and dads. Sometimes they are taking care of a rare child. Sometimes they are a patient themselves. So having the time to be able to learn how to navigate their first study, navigate having to manage the operations, manage the participants, and manage the data that they're so excited to collect is a lot of work to do. So being able to help educate them on these best practices to keep their data stewardship programs in line to keep it secure, as well as collecting good data for the community and for research. So collection in general, so this is kind of your structure, your question types. Is it multi-select? Is it single select? Is this a question that maybe would benefit from some of that patient's own words type of answers? The hierarchy, so branching logic, having surveys in different orders. Also curation. So collecting the data and making sure that it's validated, that it's correct. You need to have somebody look at any of the data to ensure that the correct diagnosis is in there. Perhaps the question was not asked in a manner that conveyed what you were looking for. Maybe you need to ask it in another way. Maybe somebody reaches out to be able to engage somebody to get those answers or answer those questions for you. And then, of course, tied all together is the control. So this is your accessibility and your security. So making sure that your users have the permissions they need to, and don't have the permissions they don't need to for managing the study, for doing all of the work for administrating the surveys, as well as sending notifications and keeping people engaged. The data privacy, as well as removal. Of course, obviously, it is a privilege to be able to have all of this information, but it is sensitive personal information. Everybody has a right to have this data removed if they would like to. They also have the right to say, you know what, I don't want to participate within this study anymore. So making sure that all of those controls are in place so this can easily be done. As we had talked about, manually removing all of these is very difficult sometimes. You want to make sure that you get it right is very important. So all of this is very important in building this into your study as well as building this into the platform. So the two of these together are what help us to ensure that these registries are launched and are successful, and we can move them down the road to posting them onto the DAP to share with everybody in this organized manner, and it's data that is useful to people. So as mentioned, we have the program, which is really great. I highly recommend. Our research team is really fantastic about touching on all of those subjects. It really is a lot of information to look at. And sometimes even when you think you have a vision, having the details to be able to design it in such a way and connect all of those bubbles together is very important. So in addition to having the program and the education, the platform has new features. The new platform has these new features to help support these tenets that we teach and be able to implement these various practices. We also have some features that are there to enrich these data sets through added context, as well as expanding the reach to some of these groups, communities, and populations, even within your own rare disease community. So some of those things launched included language support. So having the platform available in English, Spanish, and French. They can navigate through it. And we also have survey support. So if groups would like to offer surveys in those languages, they are able to. Customizable consent and assent forms, as well as opt-ins. So as we had talked about, it's really a gift, again, for them to take their time to fill out these surveys. So making sure that they see the content that is applicable and important to them is really key for minimizing the time that they need to, look through all of this legalese, which is important. I'm not going to stress that it's not important. It's very important for them to see it, but at the same time, rather than scrolling through all of the pages that are only applicable to participants or only applicable to caregivers, the customizable allows the different sheets to pop up, as well as the correct signature forms to pop up and dates. So all the consent forms are filled out appropriately. Notifications, invites, and follow-up. So we have emails that go out. We have notifications within the system to let them know that they have surveys due. They have new surveys that are available. It allows the admins as well too to be able to re-engage and help your participants move along those various steps. We know that those steps are important. The steps to enter the information, the steps to consent, the steps to take the surveys, but at the same time, they can be barriers. Not that we want them to be, but at the same time, it is very important for all of our patients to understand all of these things. So expanded curation capabilities and review tools. So there are a lot of options and tools on the back end available for study and system admins to be able to curate information, to be able to review these lists and help these people along, send notifications en masse if they have to people to raise awareness over filling out surveys or raise awareness over some other things related to their study to re-engage people. Related to this is the improvements in dashboards and reporting. So being able to use your metrics and all of the data you've collected to help drive some decisions or understand which tasks you need to do or are a priority when you're trying to manage your study, manage your participants, manage your data, and everything else that you have to do while also running your organization. And lastly, integration of other data sources. So obviously, with technology, we're always advancing. And the beauty of advancing and being able to collect this data so fast is obviously, how do you get it all together? So the platform also has a lot of capabilities for integrating other data sources, not just having patients inputted directly in there. If it's already input somewhere else, obviously the beauty and the ease would be in bringing it to the platform rather than having them do it all over again. If they want to contribute the information and you're going to make them re-enter everything all over again, I can see why people would not want to participate. So having the ability to bring in EHR data, for example, having the ability to have others input data on their behalf, clinician enter data, even just migration. So even, I will be honest, between ourselves, like even with our own system. So since we had launched the new platform, we do have a lot of registries still on the old platform. So the new platform does have a lot more features and organization and stuff that is really unique, but at the same time, you do have to reconcile the movement back and forth. If you were to bring your data from somewhere else, this is really precious data, you've collected, you don't necessarily want to recollect it. So if you do have the ability to, and you're able to migrate your data, incorporating that in, so then you can build on it rather than starting from the bottom floor again. So, and with that, I think that finishes up kind of our, start to finish really. And I think that is backwards since we did the finish, but then I went all the way back to the beginning to how it really starts. So thank you.
Thank you, Kasey, and thank you, Will, for this exciting presentation. Hey, everyone, I'm Alex Betourné. I'm Executive Director for the RDCA-DAP platform. I've been working for the program and collaborating with NORD as well since late 2020. So since I was told to do my introduction, I'm going to keep it short and sweet and just move to questions. But, before asking our panelists questions, just to remind our audience, please, we have a Q&A. So put your question in the chat box and yeah, ask everything you want to ask to our presenter today. Again, I'm really excited by the presentation because the mission of RDCA-DAP is to break data silos and it's to promote data sharing. And we live, in an ecosystem that continues to build more data collections. More foundations are leading data collections effort. And it's great. It's continuing to build. We also have more and more rare disease data platform or more platforms that allows data for rare disease communities. And so it's critical that we build this kind of platform-to-platform collaboration, as you've listened today in that discussion between RDCA-DAP and NORD's IAMRARE platform. Connecting these two platforms together to facilitate data sharing is really critical, because this is how ultimately you break data silos, by fostering an ecosystem where platform-to-platform collaboration are implemented. It means that we don't need, RDCA-DAP to have all the rare disease data, but we need these kind of bridges with other entities. In case we have a new scientific plan, we can bring that data in and facilitate aggregation of data, increase the amount of information we can use ultimately to inform drug development solutions. We have similar collaborations, not exactly the same, but we're starting to build an API with the Matrix platform that hosts a lot of registries. For rare disease, we have a collaboration with the BVD platform, a platform that hosts a lot of industry data that helps us get access to some clinical trials from industry. We're also working with Global Genes on aggregation of rare epilepsy data, potentially at some point to federate with their platform. We're also going to announce soon a master data sharing agreement with the Citizen Health platform. So all of that to say, I think this is really what it takes in this complex ecosystem to promote data sharing. So that's my spiel, but I'm gonna kick off with a few questions. To Will and Kasey, you've been working for quite a while now on this collaboration. So from your perspective, what has been the most complex things you had to tackle as you work to implement this federation between the platforms?
You want to start us off, Kasey?
I guess since I'm the beginning of the process. So the most
Yeah.
challenging has been, I think, as I said before, with the variety of registries that we have and the variety of surveys that we have. Obviously, everybody has their own questions, and they should be. They're specific to the conditions, and every condition is different. Every symptom is different. Every progression is different. So trying to standardize that and kind of make
Mhm.
it general enough that you can put it all together without losing the unique context that every one of those answers and all of those surveys contribute is really hard, but also very important. So I would say for on our side and working with Will, that was probably the hardest, but also the most rewarding to make sure that this is all conveyed in still such a way that is as much you know, together and intact without identifying anybody. Because obviously, having a rare disease in itself is identifying you are rare, you are unique. So finding that balance has been a challenge, but also, really great to work with Will on this. So, Will, what about on your side?
Yeah, I really agree. It's so challenging because data standards mean that we want things to be really common. And, it's like the goal is to have things be really uniform. And there isn't a lot of uniformity in rare diseases. And I think, that's one of the things that was really complex but rewarding about how we try to approach the actual structure of the data. And on our end, one of the things that we really had to balance was how do we represent this data in our platform in a way that is not sort of breaking the integrity of the original data, but also making it richer. And, I sort of view RDCA-DAP as a place where data gets to come and has a second life a lot of times, right? It's, sort of this additional use that it wasn't thought of. And so we want to try to enrich it with ontology terms or with search terms that make it easy to find. And being able to understand, like, what would a researcher be searching that would match how a patient thought about the same problem is an ongoing challenge for us. So, really trying to break that communication barrier between here's how we're going to analyze the data versus here's how a patient would describe it.
Yeah, great answers. I never thought about it as second life. I always talk about how we try to maximize the use and the utility of the data. The use because we want to make it available to scientists, but the utility is how do we work to really extract what can be extracted from the data sets and maximize discoveries
Yeah.
that scientists can make. So that's great. And then just another question from me before we start addressing the audience questions. You gave us some concrete examples of lessons learned, which is great. We hear a lot about data quality, which you talked about too, right? And I think it's sometimes a little hard to grasp by some rare disease communities. What do we mean by data quality, right?
Mhm.
Like it's really important. How do we make the data better? How do we help people improve their data collections? How do we ensure the data is fit for use by drug developers that may access it on the platform? Do you have maybe like other concrete examples or just further insights you want to tell us today about that particular topic?
Will, do you want to start first this time?
Yeah, so one that comes to mind is we have within surveys, a lot of times there's kind of controls around them. So there was an example that we saw a few months ago where there was a question that was what we call like a single select. So there's a question and a radio button, and you get to click one of the answers. And I forget all the exact technical detail, but the sort of crux of the issue was we ended up seeing answers in the data that didn't match what we had in the metadata. And so the challenge is, from kind of a regulatory perspective, we want to know what were the possible options that a patient selected from, because that's going to inform as much what they picked as what they didn't pick. And so, if the options are 1 to 4 weeks or more than 4 weeks or 1 month to 12 months, you think about how the different options are going to help you understand some context there. And so this was a really interesting example where there was like a short period where there was another answer that was available and it didn't get registered within the metadata that we had gotten. And so making sure that the metadata accurately describes what the patient was exposed to or the caregiver was answering really helps us understand the kind of whole context there. And so that's I think a good example of data quality for like internal consistency between the two. And thankfully, NORD Group was able to help us resolve that one. It just took a little bit of data investigation work, so to speak.
So to build on what Will had said, so number one, as I had kind of discussed the platform, the new release of the new platform, we did build a lot of those in there. So a lot of these surveys and the questions do get very complex. If you have a variety of different phenotypes within the same gene mutation, that could mean a bunch of different things. So maybe it's a different set of questions, maybe it's one different question, maybe it's a completely
Yeah.
different survey. So being able to build some of those checks within the platform itself really helps to ensure that what the patient is presented with is exactly what they should be seeing. Also on the back end, a lot of these patient groups, they spend a lot of time developing their data dictionary. So we want to make sure that that integrity is as much as possible conserved. So when those questions are asked, they're asked in the right, they came up with that sequence for a reason to lead you down that thought process, to lead you down that progression of what we're looking for or the types of answers where they want to look at. So building a lot of those features in and also helping them to guide with the program, the research is onboarding program, thinking logically in that way. What should you put on there? What shouldn't be included? What other parameters should you be asking for to ensure that it doesn't go one way or the other? It really is one of those things you have to think, what is the most left field thing that somebody can think? Everybody has their own mindset. Everybody has had their own journey in their diagnosis or their doctors, their providers, the scientists, online reading as well too. A question can mean 20 different things to, 30 different people or 30 different things to 30 different people. As much as possible, trying to help them along that way to really get that 80-20 that people are going to understand exactly what you're asking, but also it's easy for them to look at it too and say, okay, what was our pathway in thinking about this? We wanted them to answer this way. We wanted to guide them along this pathway. So I think all of those together with the program and the platform supporting it to be able to get it to Will to, do all of those things has really been kind of a big part of that.
Awesome, thank you. And you talked a lot about metadata and data dictionary. Just want to make sure like it's really important for us within the RDCA-DAP platform because we want well-organized metadata and we make the data available to the users. It's critical because it's not just about ultimately we want scientists to access the patient-level data, but we want people to like really discover what's in the platform and inform themselves on the content of the data sets so that they can make an informed request for patient-level data. And so that piece is really critical. I see a lot of questions for me actually, but let's start with one for you. One of our listeners is asking, I don't really understand the difficulty with including patient birth date. Can the birth date be date shifted along with all the other dates related to that person? You have to date shift everything to the same amount to preserve the time relationship in the clinical record. No? Question mark.
Will, do you want to take that one and I can supplement, or it's completely up to you? I can take that as well.
You want to start us off and then I can add
Sure.
context.
So we can do the date shifting. It's just that if you do have some of these registries honestly have been open for years, so there is a lot of information in there. And if you're asking for specific dates for milestones, the more dates you include, the higher the probability of identification that you have. So even if we do shift it, you are increasing that risk. The other high risk also is if you have a rare disease that the onset is quite early in childhood, a lot of that timing really does matter if you shift it a month, if you shift it 7 days, even with the progression. So that's why we're kind of trying to find that balance. So we had in the past, and that's why it took a lot of time to do a lot of these things per registry. We have it automated to do separate things. As I said, we have the process automated. So we don't know yet if we need to change that automation based on specific time periods that for early onset, the shift is between this date range and, for other adult or late onset diseases, maybe it can be within a couple of months and stuff like that. So that's kind of what we're trying to work out because we understand that one size doesn't fit all. But at the same time, we don't necessarily want to go back to spending, 2 to 3 months on every data set because we have to shift all of the dates and everything. It is a lot of valuable information. And the beauty of being able to have the flexibility to have more participants, to have more data, to have more surveys. If people are going to, recruit and collect this data. We don't want them punished. We don't want anybody punished in slowing down the process to make this available to them because we have to customize everything. But obviously important to conserve all of those time periods because it really is important in a progression that, develops within 30 days, 60 days, it really is important. So Will, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, I think the only other thing is it's always, with so many things, it's careful balance, right? But, the risk here, what we have to do is assess what is the risk of re-identification against the value of the data itself, right? And one of the things is understanding what level of anonymity is the patient expecting for themselves, and that there is always going to be some risk, but how do we mitigate that risk, and then how do we constrain it? And across the globe, especially, there's a lot of different understandings of what privacy looks like, and we want to be respectful of that. And although it seems, on the surface level, well, what age are they? That isn't seem very sensitive, but within the rare disease context where there are so few patients with these diseases, that does become very isolating. And it is the sort of thing that once you understand, well, there's a patient that had this procedure at this date, you really do get down to the N of one. And so then it really becomes possible to re-identify somebody, even if it's not intentional. And so we want to be sensitive to finding a good balance between increasing the research utility of the data versus any of those risks.
Great, thank you. Going on a few questions for me that relate to governance. I'm not going to read the question, just try to answer them as we go. So, with RDCA-DAP, we get a lot of data from different sources, different stakeholders, from the NORD IAMRARE registries, from industry, from academics. We have a data contribution agreement. This is where each dataset contributor is going to tell us who can access the data and what is the governance. So we have some flexibility to maximize data sharing and try to answer to the concerns of each dataset contributor. With the IAMRARE platform, there is a master data contribution agreement, and then NORD offers their IAMRARE registry group the possibility to share to RDCA-DAP. And so they have a little cover sheet where they decide if they want to share. And then the governance, they can decide to review the request for access to their patient-level data, or they can say, we're going to let the data use committee of RDCA-DAP take a look at the scientific request and make the decision on opening access or not. So technically, when a user of the platform sees an IAMRARE datasets, he can make a request. We ask for a scientific plan. Who is going to be the PI, how long do you need access to the data for? And then depending on the governance, either we're going to send that request to the registry to let us know within a month if they want to open access or not. They will get access to the scientific plan, the contact email of the user, so they can potentially discuss collaboration with that user. And then if they tell us yes, we're going to open a workspace where we allow online access to the data set, and the user sign a data use agreement with terms and conditions, such as don't try to re-identify patients, and they can do the analytical work online. If it goes to the CPAF data use committee, it's myself and other members from foundations. We're going to do the scientific evaluation. Do we think the scientific project is sound? Can the data set actually answer the questions asked? And then we vote, and if there is a majority, same thing, we're going to open up access. So this is really the process that we follow in terms of governance. We request on the DUA that if there is a publication, the data contributor needs to be acknowledged in the publication. So this is how you're going to get potentially information on an output that your user will make out of using your IAMRARE data on the RDCA-DAP platform. Obviously, you can also contact us, and we have metrics that we can communicate on how many people requested access and are we aware of any publications. So I think I answered most of these questions. There is a question on monetization. Someone is asking us, with foundations and, the struggles of maintaining a foundation or collection up, financial struggles. Is there a way to compensate organizations? So at the critical path, we don't monetize data. So the platform is free. You get access to the data for free. You get access to the workspace for free to do the analytical work. As a foundation, you can choose again to review the request for access to your data. So you may want to communicate with an industry users that requested access and maybe have these conversations, but this will be out of the RDCA-DAP platform and a private conversation you have that could inform you opening access to an industry on RDCA-DAP. But again, we don't monetize data. We have active users from industries that are leveraging the database to inform drug development activities and trial design, as well as other types of users from academia, for example. I think I have answered most of these governance questions, and I'm not seeing further questions for Will and Kasey today. So I will thank you both again for this amazing presentation, and let my colleague Dominique wrap up with a few announcements. Please stay tuned for another minute. Thanks, everyone. Or I guess I'm making the announcement. That would be easier. So please note that NORD is holding a scientific symposium on June 2nd and 3rd in DC. They will have a great list of speakers, including people from FDA. So that's June 2nd and 3rd. It is the first iteration of this new scientific symposium from NORD. And then CPAF Global Impact Conference will happen in September in DC as well, with attendance from FDA, industry, and really 3 days about overall all the CPAF activities, including rare disease and pediatrics. So please register to our conference as well as NORD. With that said, thanks everyone for attending this webinar.